I believe that the people who adopt AI, who upskill, who get their employees upskilled are going to be so much further ahead than those that don't. Anybody who waits and sees they're going to get blown past because AI is moving so fast. The changes are happening so quickly.
Welcome to today's episode of The Clinical Current, where I'm excited to welcome back guest Kelly Roland, who is an expert in AI and clinical research. Today, Kelly and I dive into several recent important publications surrounding AI, including America's AI Action Plan, McKinsey's Gen AI, a game changer for biopharma operations, Microsoft's Work Trend Index, and Matt Britton's new book, Generation AI. Kelly brings a wealth of knowledge to the table in this area, making it a really insightful and exciting episode and a conversation that I don't think that you will want to miss. So join us. All right, Kelly, thank you for joining us again on The Clinical Current. So happy to have you back.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Sure. So since our last episode, I've really been diving deep into AI, of course, and especially as it relates to its impact on healthcare and clinical trials in particular. So I've actually read 4 publications in particular that stood out as particularly relevant with respect to clinical trials. And I'd love to get your perspective on each of these. So if you're willing, I will jump right into the first one, which is entitled Winning the Race, America's AI Action Plan. And it outlines a sweeping strategy to accelerate AI innovation through deregulation, infrastructure investments, and global leadership with significant implications for healthcare. I would agree with that, specifically related to clinical trials. It identifies healthcare as a slow, quote, slow adopter, and proposes reduced federal regulation and oversight. And it really incentivizes states with less restrictive AI laws to encourage rapid deployment of AI tools in clinical trials, which I'm sure that you're excited about. But I do have a few questions with respect to this action plan. So number one, what are the risks and the opportunities of applying AI to clinical trials under this deregulated framework?
Sure. So good question. I think when people hear the word deregulation, it gets them very uncomfortable. So I want to take a step back and really look at what the real kind of scope is of the America's AI Action Plan. It's really a blueprint, and it's a methodology. It's a call to action for government agencies to stop building fences and start building racetracks. So I think that's one of the key elements that we really need to think about as we're reading it. I know people get often uncomfortable with words deregulation. It's really to make sure that America as a whole is staying competitive globally. And in pharma specifically, I think this opens the door in many new ways. It's really helping to bridge the gap between the innovators and the regulators. And so it really calls out those government agencies to say, let's work together. Let's figure out a plan to ensure that while being regulated, it's not saying remove regulations, it's saying don't add additional regulations. So, they talk a little bit about regulatory sandboxes. So testing AI's capabilities in kind of a real world setting with the FDA, which I think is really exciting. It's very interesting that, you can work together with them to build tools, to have their oversight, to ask questions in that real world setting. So I think what it does is it really accelerates these different capabilities and really helps bring forward the scope of AI, and that we as a country are moving ahead in that direction. So it really kind of frames that out.
So how do you see these AI-driven tools reshaping, specifically from a clinical trial perspective, operational efficiencies? Can you touch on that with respect to what you're doing at Trial Genesis and just in general, how any of these AI tools might reshape operational efficiencies?
Sure. I think right now it is the time for operations to shine. really. I think the FDA guidance recently that they've pulled together talks a little bit about this, where if you are working within the operations space, you have free range, right? You're not overly kind of encumbered in that sense. So they are supportive of that, and they really want to ensure that that there's no hindrances in that space. So I think as an operations person at heart, this is what I've done for many, many years. It is the perfect time. So I think as teams, as clinical trial operations groups are really thinking about these things, sit down and really look at your processes, look at your flows, look at where am I spending a lot of manual effort that maybe AI can accelerate. AI should never take the end-to-end process fully, but it should be part of this to really augment your expertise. So instead of spending time doing manual, laborious tasks, let's instead shift over to using your expertise where it's needed and helping to really enhance your value to the company.
As an operational person at heart as well within the clinical trial space, I see some low-hanging fruits to your point about the things that you normally would do manually that would take you many hours or many weeks even. And I know you're heavily involved in this space with respect. I immediately think of procedures, of course. I know I was recently speaking with someone in the clinical trial space about contracts, and that can be a really laborious, time-consuming, heavy process. I don't know if you have any, has anyone approached you with respect to things beyond the procedures, such as contracts? Or what are some other low-hanging fruits or operational efficiencies that you have been asked about recently?
No, you hit the nail on the head there. I think there's a couple core buckets that I think are standing out that seem to be universal. So one you mentioned was SOPs. So using AI to check SOPs against the regulations, that's kind of a universal ask from the clients that we have. Another universal ask I'll say is everybody who runs a clinical trial has to oversee the monitoring effort, whether that's internal CRAs, whether you are transferring that out to a CRO. Either way, you have to oversee what's going on there. So oversight of the monitoring reports and what's coming in. There's a risk-based monitoring approach that needs to be taken into account as well. How do you ensure that? How do you show the regulators that you have spot checked and you have looked at all this data and you've seen the trends? So that is a huge one as well. I would say the monitoring oversight piece is huge. And then to your point, I think people are now looking around and saying, what else can we explore? What else can we add to that? Contracts are definitely a space I think that is ripe for operations, especially in the contract to invoicing components. So you have a contract, you get an invoice, and the AI can help match that up for you very, very quickly, very, very seamlessly. And a lot of time, people, effort is spent doing that one-to-one check that can be freed up. So it's really a much cleaner, easier process flow in areas that just tie people up, and it's no longer needed. We have the technology now to enable it. Let's do it.
Yeah, I completely agree. So moving right along to the McKinsey report, and I thought this one was really interesting. It was entitled Gen AI, a Game Changer for Biopharma Operations. And in it, it really outlines how generative AI can unlock, they mention up to $7 billion annually in productivity, quality, and cost savings across the entire biopharma value chain. They highlight, as we've been talking about, streamlining documentation. It can improve decision-making and really just reducing any operational bottlenecks. But it does caution against a few things, and I'd love you to touch on these, one of which was hallucinations, one of which was IP leakage, and the last of which was demographic bias. Specifically, they talk about this with respect to regulated environments like clinical trials. So my question to you is, how should sponsors and CROs prepare to really mitigate these inherent risks while still embracing the technology? Because you certainly want to embrace the technology, but be very aware of these risks.
Sure. No, those are really good questions. And, I think I'll do my best to kind of break those down into digestible pieces here. Starting with hallucinations. So if people are not familiar what a hallucination is, it's basically when you ask I'll give an example, ChatGPT, Gronk, one of those models to do something. If it doesn't know the answer, it makes it up. And they call that a hallucination.
Okay.
So, and that's a very kind of toned down definition. But that's essentially what it does. The AI doesn't know, so it makes it up and it pulls in something. So you might get really weird answers sometimes. And each iteration of each of those different LLMs or large language models gets better each time. It's learning by the second. So it's getting much, much better, but you still might get weird responses that come in. So to avoid that in the pharma landscape, number one, I highly recommend using a small language model or a locked in model, which basically means you don't go out to the internet where there's billions and billions and billions of data points. You really hone it into exactly where you want it to look. And you tell the AI, if you don't know, don't make it up. So you can add prompts. So prompting is extraordinarily important in this sense too, where you develop a prompt to speak to the AI that really hones in exactly what you want. If it doesn't know, it's not allowed to make up an answer. It asks you a question. So if you don't know, ask me. And so that it will do that. So I think making sure that you're testing your prompts often, that you are making sure that you set those prompts up to put structure around them, and to also make sure that when you are using LLMs, that you're locking them down as much as possible to reduce the probability that you're going to get a hallucination. The smaller the data that you look at, the less hallucinations you're going to have.
Okay. So in terms of what you're doing at Trial Genesis with your PEMS system, would that be then considered a small language model? And thus it is more equipped to deal, or you will have less, quote, hallucinations, and I'm sure you're testing often, et cetera, everything that you just mentioned.
Right. Yeah, we want to make sure that there's repeatability, right? We are in the audit space, and we want to be able to show an auditor that if you ask the same question to the AI model, you're going to get 99% the same result. And so that is really what we're ensuring by locking it in. So we also lock it into our environment, meaning we take the model, we pull it into our data store. We don't let anything escape to the internet. So when you mentioned IP leakage, I think that's another very important part that any company needs to be thinking about. If you are using just your regular old ChatGPT or Copilot that is not regulated by your internal structure. If you don't have an AI team that locked down that Copilot, it can and will escape to the internet. And so you have to be very, very careful what you put in there, how you put in there. So I know a lot of companies are trying to figure that out. I've heard some have pulled back using Copilot at all.
I've heard that as well.
So I think, and they need to kind of figure that out a little bit. So I highly, highly recommend inviting consultants in who know the space and who can talk with the teams. There's new AI groups popping up in companies all over. And so I think talk to your internal teams, bring in the experts, and really try to develop something that, again, gives you repeatability, auditability, allows you to reduce the hallucinations as much as possible, and then ensures that you're locked in and your IP is not escaping into the internet.
All right, moving right along. Another really interesting publication that I found was Microsoft's Work Trend Index Annual Report 2025. That's a tongue twister. And it's entitled Year the Frontier Firm is Born. And in this, as you know, they explore how AI is really just fundamentally reshaping the nature of work. And it's giving rise to what they call, it's a new type of organization that they call the frontier, quote, frontier firm. And essentially, this frontier firm blends humans with AI-powered agents so they can scale faster. So if you will, it's like the group of humans along with their agents. And they actually incorporate it into their entire business model so they can operate in a more agile way. And really, basically, it redefines productivity. They even have them sometimes I've seen within the org chart. You'll have humans as well as the AI agents. So my question to you with respect to this trend report and the frontier firm, what do you feel are the first steps that leaders should take to really integrate AI agents into their teams? And then I'll have a follow-up question about what are the key challenges that you see with these organizations, what do they face, when scaling the AI adoption, and then how can they overcome them?
Okay, so first out of that, I would say ask, or if you already know, what is your AI strategy for your company? Where have the leaders sent anything out, and what is their goal? If they don't have one, I think it's time to really sit down and think it through. What does it mean? I think educating your employees is critical to something like this, because I think there's a lot of nuanced, people are frightened. There's a lot of, media that is talking about how AI is just going to replace all jobs in 5 years. And so naturally, people would be resistant to want to use something that's going to take my job. So I think, to your point, I think it's really the communication that needs to come from the leadership of these companies that AI is used to augment, not replace. So I think that's the first message that needs to go out to these companies. Now, maybe some companies are not looking to do that. Again, that's their call. But I think overall, augmenting, like you had mentioned, would be the perfect way to go here, where how can the AI be used to accelerate somebody's work, improve quality, consistency, and again, let them use their expertise in new and different ways to format and shape a company in new, brilliant ways, because they're not bogged down with those manual tasks that are just draining the life out of everybody. Instead, let them be energized because the boring work's being taken care of, and they can really use their expertise in new ways. So I would say augment your teams with the AI, have an AI first kind of mentality where, like you said, let's build it into the work chart. So people don't see their jobs disappearing. It's an augmented version of them, right? And let's see where we can use folks in new and different ways.
Augment, not replace. I really like that. I was actually listening to a Mel Robbins podcast recently, and I think the woman on was Emma Greed. She's the CEO of Good American. You may be familiar with the jeans. So it seemed like she was ahead of her time 2 years ago. She tasked everyone at her company with coming up with at least some workflow or process that could be completely changed by AI. So she, I think, maybe was ahead of the curve 2 years ago, but I think that would be maybe an interesting approach that it could be a call to action for employees. Leadership they could do some type of, I don't want to say a contest, but they could have some type of innovation game, if you will, where folks, a competition, right? They could, folks or teams could come to the table, and that's exactly what she did, and it seemed to work really well. And I think that really brings folks in to start thinking and gets them excited about it, and then they can become one of these quote frontier firms. So I think that might be an interesting exercise, and it sounds like your company, folks like you could come into a company and really help guide them. I know we talked about Rachel. She's very equipped to do that, just to come in and help brainstorm with these groups to see what they can do.
Yes.
So the last publication was actually a book, and I know I was texting you, feverishly telling you to read this as soon as possible. I thought it was great. I found it in the airport, and I think I read it completely within the hour flight on the way home. That's how good it was. And it's called Generation AI, Why Generation Alpha and the Age of AI Will Change Everything. And in it, Matt Britton, I'm not sure if you were familiar with him. I was not, but he is a leading voice on consumer trends and just emerging technologies in general. He was born, I think, in the mid-70s, so he is Generation X. But in the book, he really urges, to your point, leaders to stop viewing AI as optional. Again, to the point of the frontier firm. And he says, don't view them as AI or as optional or experimental. Instead, see it as a core infrastructure for future success. So what would you say to industry leaders who are still viewing AI as optional?
I think you're either going to get on the train or run over by it.
Yeah.
I believe that the people who adopt AI, who upskill, who get their employees upskilled, are going to be so much further ahead than those that don't. Anybody who waits and sees they're going to get blown past, because AI is moving so fast, the changes are happening so quickly, and to not really consider how it's going to impact your structure of your teams, how it's going to accelerate the work in your company. I think it's not the best idea. And so I would strongly advise, if you don't have an AI strategy, get one. If you need to, pull in some consultants to help you. And if not, then I feel you'll be left behind. And I think that's probably more what we will see, is companies maybe taking over other companies, or others just becoming not relevant any longer, just because they're not caught up to the times. So that would be my recommendation.
I would hate to see anyone left behind. I think leaders, I completely agree with you, leaders and just everyone in general should become AI literate, really come up with an AI strategy, keep learning, and keep growing. And I think it's just going to be an amazing time to be within clinical research, pharma, just an amazing time to be around. And I think it's really exciting. So as always, Kelly, I know we're almost out of time, but it's such a pleasure speaking with you, and just really for sharing your insights and helping us navigate the evolving intersection of AI and clinical research. I really think that your clarity and your experience, and you have really a lot of background and a lot of experience with this, so it certainly helps us at Ascendia, and it allows some really important conversations to happen across the field. So again, I look forward to having you. We're having you one more time after this as a third part to this series, but I continue to look forward to it. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. And thank you for sending me all the texts and the books and the things. You're helping me keep up on,
you have some reading to
do.
Yes.
So thank you for that as well. And it's always a pleasure to work with the Ascendia team, and I appreciate being here. So looking forward to next time.
Thank you. You too. Have a great day. Huge thanks to Kelly Roland for joining us again on today's Clinical Current podcast, and thanks to you for tuning in. If you found today's episode helpful, be sure to subscribe to our channel, and I'll also be sure to include all of the referenced publications in our show notes. Also, you can find more information about Ascendia Clinical and Kelly's company Trial Genesis on www.ascendiaclinical.com, as well as on our LinkedIn page.